မိတို့ရဲ့စိတ်ဓာတ်ကလေးတွေခုခံကာကွယ်ရေးကောင်းဖို့ရာစိတ်ချမ်းသာခြင်းရဲ့နိလန်းနေရှာဖွေပြီးတော့လိုက်နာရင်စိတ်ခုခံအားကောင်းပုံကိုကိုကြမ်းမာရေးလိုက်စားတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဟာစိတ်မှာကိုယ်မှာခုခံရေးကာကွယ်ရေးကောင်းပုံပေါ့လေနှိုင်းရှင်ပြီးတော့ပြောသွားပါတယ်ဒီနေ့ဘယ်ပုံဘယ်နည်းစိတ်ခုခံအားတွေကောင်းအောင်ပြုလုပ်ရမယ်ဆိုတဲ့အချက်တွေဆက်လက်ပြီးတော့ဖြည့်ရှင်းပါမယ်
Sayadaw talked about spiritual resistance yesterday, and he compared the value of spiritual resistance with that of physical resistance, and also talked about how both physical and spiritual resistances are essential for good physical health and mental or spiritual health respectively. He talked also briefly about how this sort of spiritual resistance could be cultivated and strengthened. And today he will discuss this further.
Mariaပြောခဲ့ပါတယ်မိမိရဲ့တဏ္ဍာမှာလောဘဒေါသအစရှိတဲ့အနှောက်အယှက်တွေကင်းကွာမှုဟာနီလမှန်မှန်ဖြောင့်မြတ်စွာကျင့်သုံးမှုနဲ့စနေတဲ့ကျင့်သုံးမှုအမိပြုနေတယ်လို့ပြောခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီဖြောင့်မတ်စွာကျင့်သုံးမှုဟာဘာနဲ့ဆက်ဆက်လဲဆိုတာပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒါလေးဒီနေ့ဆက်ပေးပါမယ်
In an earlier talk, Sayadaw discussed or pointed out that freedom from the hindrances, from the kilesas which hinder development of wholesome mental states, can only occur or can only be brought about through right practice, or rather that freedom of the hindrances is connected with, or rather is related with walking on a correct path of practice. What is this correct sort of practice? What is this correct practice related to, connected to? That is the question, the central theme of tonight's talk.
ကျမ်းဂန်များမှာပြထားတာစာသတ္တမသဝနာဒီနာလို့ပြပါတယ်စာထို့သောအနောက်ချက်တရားတွေကင်းကွာရေးအတွက်ဒီလမှန်မှာဖြောင့်မတ်စွာကျင့်သုံးခြင်းသည်သတ္တမသဝနာဒီနာမြတ်စွာဘုရားအဆုံးအမဖြစ်တဲ့သူတော်ကောင်းတရားလေ့လာမေးမြန်းနာယူမှတ်သားမှုနဲ့ဆက်ဆက်လျက်ရှိနေပါသည်တဲ့
It is said in the text that this right and correct practice in order to free oneself from the hindrances is brought about or is involved, or rather is brought about by a number of factors. It's the is the study of the Buddha's teaching and discussing it, or rather asking when one is in doubt, involved in discussion about the Dhamma, and to listen very carefully when a teacher gives the answer or explains the Dhamma, to bear in mind what has been said. Mata, you know.
Nila Mama, Shamas were gentle who's Mangaro Tisaliva Tiago Tibu at Wepave.
The correct, the right practice, according to the Buddha's teaching, is essentially the practice made to understand or comprehend the truth of suffering things.
Shiva Dugatisa and the Buddha Tisago, what at this alu kovare, but le pabi of Pitata Holo. No point of you go, wood at this alu kovare, to a see a layadwa, laya joy a jump pillow, wood at this alu kovare. The Nia Shiva Tisanabago, Logi Tisalu Kovido, no point this Anapago, Logo de la Tisalu kovare.
The practice therefore involves the effort made to understand the Four Noble Truths. The first two of the Four Noble Truths are sometimes called Vata Satya, or the truth of
what
cycle. Is the cyclic sort of truth, because the truth of suffering things and the truth of the cause of suffering things are involved in a cycle within samsara. The second pair of the Four Noble Truths is sometimes called Vivata Satya, or the truth that unwinds this cycle. It does not perpetuate continued existence in samsara. The first pair again is also sometimes called Lokiya Satya, because it's a mundane sort of phenomena, whereas the second pair is known as the supramundane truth, because it involves the truth that leads us away from mundane phenomena.
Tiyashumate Sura Loki Tisa Napago Shumalu Yavare Logo the Tisa Napa Shumalu Yavabu Papilu Lesera Loki Tisa Koma Shini Rave တွား6ပါးကဖြစ်ပြနေတဲ့ယုံနာတရားတွေဒုက္ခသစ္စာတိုက်တဲ့တရားတွေပြီးတော့ဒါတွေကိုအကောင်းထင်ပြီးတော့ตายရတယ်ဆိုတာလည်းပဲตายရတတ်မဲ့တဲ့သဘောတွေလည်းထင်ရှားရှိနေတာပဲလောကုတ္တရာသစ္စာကတော့ကိုယ်တဏ္ဍာမှာဖြစ်ဖူးသေးတာမဟုတ်ရင်သူ့ကိုရှုလို့မရပါဘူး
The first pair of mundane truth can be the object of one's meditation precisely because these are mundane phenomena which occur within our bodies and minds. They occur within us through the six sense doors. There are all the various variety of mind and matter, and also, of course, the ubiquitous second truth of craving. The second pair of supramundane truths, however, should not be made the object of one's observation, should not be made the object of mindfulness. As far as these supramundane truths have not yet occurred within us, then it would be futile to look for them.
အဲ့ဒီဥဒ္ဒခေါ်တဲ့လောကုတ္တရာသစ္စာနှစ်ပါးအပေါ်မှာတော့အဲ့ဒီသစ္စာနှစ်ပါးဟာအိဋ္ဌလိုအပ်တယ်ကန္တနှစ်သက်စရာကောင်းတယ်ဉာဏ်တို့စရာကောင်းတယ်လို့သူတို့ရဲ့ဂုဏ်ကိုကြားဘူးယုံမျှနဲ့ကိစ္စပြီးစီနှစ်ထားရမှာပါ
For a beginner, for a person who starts to walk this path, the beginning yogi, it is quite sufficient for him or her to understand that the second pair of supramundane truths are desirable, and they are something noble and something which is worthy of being cherished.
ကျန်သစ္စာနှစ်ပါးပေါ်မှာတော့အပိုင်း၅ပိုင်းကျမ်းဂန်များမှာပြထားပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီအပိုင်း၅ပိုင်းက1ဥက္ကဟ2ပရိပု္ပ္ပာ3သဝန4ဒါရဏနဲ့5သမစနလို့ဒီလိုပိုင်းပြီးတော့ပြထားပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ဘာသာပြန်ပြီးမှအဲ့ဒီ5မျိုးတည်းကဥက္ကဟဆိုတာလေ့လာမှုပေါ့ဒါတွေကဒုက္ခသစ္စာခေါ်တယ်ဒါသမုဒယသစ္စာခေါ်တယ်ဆိုတာဇာပေအရာပေါ့လေဒါယုတ်ခေါ်တယ်ဒါနာမ်ခေါ်တယ်ဒီယုတ်နာတရားတွေကမျက်စိနာနာအစရှိတဲ့တဝါ6ပါးမှာထင်ပေါ်နေအကြောင်းတိုက်ဆိုင်နေထင်ပေါ်နေကြတယ်စသည်ပေါ့လေရှုခွင့်ရှုခွက်အာယုန်တွေပေါ့ပြီးတော့ရှုမှတ်ပုံတွေပေါ့လေဒါသင်ကြားရပါတယ်ရှိဘူးဆိုတာစာပေအရာအဲ့ဒါဥက္ကဟလို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါပြန်လိုက်သေးတာပေါ့
The texts tell us that with regard to the first pair of mundane truths, we need to approach them from 5 aspects, which in Pali it's called Ugaha, the first one, which is study or learning. The second is Varipucha, which is questioning or discussion. The third is Savana, which is listening to what the teacher says. And the fourth is Dharana, which means bearing in mind what has been said. And the fifth one is Samasana, which means investigation or rubbing in. Or it could be interpreted to mean actual practice. The first aspect of learning or study really means an understanding, intellectual perhaps, of what these Four Noble Truths are all about. And understanding that the first Noble Truth of suffering things refer to mind and matter, and refer to how mind and matter are interrelated by this mechanism of cause and effect, and how they also manifest the characteristic of impermanence, of non-self, of suffering. And this also includes a working understanding of how one should practice, or the method of practice, in order to intuitively understand, comprehend this noble truth of suffering things.
Let me be honest here, for you, yogi, time we don't need a car, one by could say Tava. They should do lame, found a lalime. Erago, Faunago, Faunalia, Yolu Kore, Eraligo, Manidaga, Nalu Kore. Little Lucy, Benjabare, the Peru Kore, Luchada, the warrior, Dayo Kore, Erali Dinida, Nan Kore. Chacha Gurema, Buranida, Eda Tona Dena Luda Zadi, Daria Yokore, Erali Leleti, and Nan Kore. Guijinaga, Nan Kore, Guidaga, Yokore, Zadi body. Dilo, she also let me out of the ounce of it. Lay lad at the boba.
Practically, this first aspect can be understood in this way. You may perhaps have been informed at the start of your practice that this is the way I practice. You sit and you watch the rise and fall. When you breathe in, the abdomen rises, and you breathe out, the abdomen collapses. And this rising and falling process is made the object of noting. And so during the rising process, you are required to note the rising and to watch what's happening there. And perhaps you may know that, you may have known intellectually, that in the rising process, you may experience certain physical sensations like tightness, tautness, movement, and pressure, and so forth. Then you may have been told that that is material phenomena. And the noting mind, the mind that knows what's happening, that knows the sensations, that feels, experiences the sensations, is mental phenomena. And so also for the falling, the physical sensations that can be observed during the falling process, like again, tightness or movement or collapsing or contraction and so forth. So these are all physical phenomena, and the mind that is noting or being aware of these phenomena at that particular time is mentality or mind. This also goes for other activities during the day, when you stand, when you walk, when you stretch and you bend. In stretching, the physical sensations that are observed in the stretching process are called metta, and the awareness or the consciousness of what's happening at that point, at that time, is mind, and so forth. So these are things that you may have intellectually understood to some extent before you started your practice.
Lo ni lo hani li la ya ma pi zong li la ya ma ma shin de achet di le shi ta ba le. Eddie machine at Chedi, Siago, a farmer tata, mayor, a preposa core. Who dear yogi, dear mayor got a charger of mayor, a mayor of an two jab. Come to maybe not Yantote. Gelo, through a mabu, so yes, Yaga, through me, a check lady, lump, poor video, lung came video body. Me video, PP, Piara, Mili, the Shiva.
Well, even if we have had a basic preliminary study of all these theory before we actually come to practice the Dhamma, there may be certain points which may still be unclear to us. And when one is involved in the process of actual practice, then one should take the opportunity to ask one's teacher. And that comes under the second aspect, which is repeated asking, repeated questioning, or a sort of discussion. So when one is unclear and one asks to clear one's doubts, ask the teacher, then the teacher will be able to explain in a way that should make the point very clear. Sayadaw says that the yogis here are very expressive and they are not inhibited at all in asking questions. That's very good. But the questions they ask sometimes are quite novel. In any way, that's good because it gives a chance for points which are in doubt to be cleared. At other times, however, the Sayadaw may have to question the yogi and to give hints so that the yogi may be able to understand certain points which is unclear to him, but of which he may not quite be aware.
Mira, Kaumare, Mamimia, Yami Kan, Mamimia Luci, Dilude, Chemadido, Yami Kandade. Sungzan Yanki, the Susanna, Yankiva, yes, of Yale, Hoja Tavare. Diabuguri ha, they, Mimianga, Turo, Pili Yavi Solution, Drunyani, take Jija, they call them. Make had a book, Moon of Bobby Maludrumaro. Pili Yava, the China, Drew the Joshi.
Even the Buddha himself had encouraged this discussion process. It is said that if one does not ask, then one will only remain in ignorance. But in asking, then there is a chance for one to be enlightened with regards to one's doubts and so forth. Even though some yogis here ask quite naughty questions, and it may give the teacher some mental acrobatics to perform, it is still quite satisfying, because if the questions are properly answered, then there is a chance that the yogi may get some clarification that would be pretty useful for his or her practice.
Dia buku dia Mika buku ani time cat wa orang mahu bau terus di luar tu boleh meja apa, swing luar tu boleh meja apa, kaum yang de yuda de sei ne meja apa sih Puiru tidak cek diri siapa lebih menang kaum ada, penyasan luar ani ne buku apa milai dia kama terus sei ne makai pun solusi ngalau mama dua bukan nanya ne boleh elu. Mata sih ne tu boleh mula meja dah mula mahu kau mana dah, meja dah dia, kau ini lepas wajah.
Sayadaw believes that the people here who have been asking questions so far have been very sincere in what they ask, and it's truly out of a sense of wanting to know, wanting to clear some doubts, that they ask questions, no matter how naughty they may appear to be. And Sayadaw, of course, tries his best to give satisfactory answers, and he hopes that they will be able to benefit by his answers. He is quite sure that the questions asked do not come from a space of wanting to test him or trying to belittle other people. And if questions are asked in that light, of course, it will not be done in good spirit.
တိလို့မရှင်းလို့ညှိနှိုင်းလို့ပေါ့လေမေးပြီဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အဖြေကိုပြီးတော့မှာပဲအဲ့ဒီအဖြေကိုရှင်းလင်းချက်တွေကိုတကယ်လူချင်းချင်းနဲ့နာယူဖို့သိအရေးကြီးပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါဟာသဝနာလို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်မေးပြီးတော့ကြာနာနာယူတည်တယ်နဲ့စူးစိုက်နာယူမှုမရှိဘူးဆိုရင်မေးရကြလည်းမနှက်ပါဘူးဆွေးနွေးရကြလည်းမနှက်ပါဘူးအဲ့ဒီပိုင်ဟာသိအရေးကြီးပါတယ်
Questions that are asked from the space of really wanting to know, of wanting to clarify one's doubts, when answered, is valuable, is very valuable. And the questioner should make it a point to really put his whole attention to what the answer is, to really listen very carefully to how the question is being answered, and to listen to the contents of the answer very carefully. So this brings us to the third aspect, which is listening very carefully, being attentive. For once one's doubts are cleared, once we get clarification, then if one does not actually listen very carefully, one is not attentive, then our question would be in vain.
ဣတ္တကိုဘုန်းကြီးကသိစေချင်တာတော့ဘုန်းကြီးကဖျားမဟုတ်ဘူးပြီးတော့နာဂစေနမထေမဟုတ်ဘူးပြီးတော့ကဘာကျော်ဖြစ်တဲ့တကယ်ပညာရှိကြီးလည်းမဟုတ်ဘူးဆိုတာတော့နားလည်ထားမှာပဲပမာပြေကမာစီဆရာတော်ဖျားကြီးရဲ့တပည့်ကမ္မထမ်းဆရာတစ်ပါးပဲဆိုတာတော့အဲ့လောက်တော့နားလည်ထားမှာပေါ့မေးတဲ့ဟာဘုန်းကြီးသိလို့ရှိရင်လည်းပဲယူသားသားနဲ့တည်သမျှပြန်ဖြေပြမှာပဲ
There's one thing though that the Sayadaw would want all of you to understand, and that is the fact that he is not the Buddha, and secondly, he is not a famous or prominent
Nagasena.
He's not Nagasena. I wonder if all of you have ever heard of Nagasena. Nagasena is a very famous arahant who was the person who answered many of the naughty questions made by King Milinda. And he's famed for his very superb and brilliant answers, and it is recorded in the book called The Questions of Milinda. It's one of the texts in the Theravada scriptures. Thirdly, Sayadaw would like to say that he is just a simple disciple of the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw, and just one of his many assisting meditation instructors. So he can only say that if questions are put forth to him, he can only try his best to answer them, and if he can, then he would answer them. If not, then too bad.
Bông ya đi biết ta có chắc cái mình cũng đi mấy rồi mà về thì rồi cháu được chú điên cả quay đấy anh này biểu là không bảo.
However, Sayadaw is not making this announcement in order to avoid answering naughty questions.
Đi biết ta đi là về tiêu mà phong như vậy chắc cái mẹ lu pa bảo.
Sayadaw is sure that there's nobody in this audience who is out to catch the Sayadaw.
Về lưu ép thì phong như sao rồi này lết đuổi bảo đi này khu bao giờ về đó giá trị để vũ tu đà đi rồi đi biết ta lưu tâm nhà đi rồi phong như tan này tâm nhà cũng như biết toan này mấy số đó dùng gì thà vậy.
Sayadaw, however, believes that he will be able to try his best to answer your questions in conformity with theory and practice.
Ai lu biết là mà phong như bà ta cái mà chuyên chuyện này đuổi bảo đi, aku biết cái gì đó, aku như vậy vậy.
Well, because unfortunately, because the Sayadaw is not conversant enough in the English language to be able to communicate directly with you, he has got to depend on the services of an interpreter.
Phong như dia aku như biết là bà này đi lên rồi aku bên bà lên luôn, thế này đấy. Bên bà lên ha, bên này trông luôn mày à, xuôi luôn mày à, na bên bà mà hoa bên đi bên nhìn nhau rồi, thế này mà. Phong như thế lên bên này lên luôn mà xếp luôn. Vậy cái gì đó bà này bên này lên luôn xếp luôn. Bên nhìn nhau rồi lên này mà đi lên ha, xuôi này mà. Là lúc bên xếp, phong như na bà mà bao lâu mà xếp luôn rồi xếp nó, sao luôn mà xếp luôn rồi xếp nó. Đi biết ta có phong như tan hay là nhà cũng như bên này mà bên này mà.
Sayadaw compares his present situation to that of a two-wheeled cart. As you know, a two-wheeled cart can only be pushed along if the two wheels are intact. If one wheel is missing, then it will be quite difficult to move that cart around. In the same way, if both of us are not able to be here, then Sayadaw says that he will not be able to communicate with you in a favorable way.
Bên này lên này lâu để chỉ đi rồi phong như phơi rồi nhiều mà luôn bây giờ bảo bên này mà trên này mà được mà thêm máu. Bên này lên này lên luôn bảo đi. Từ bao giờ phải này rồi bên này mà trên này mà không bảo luôn thì thà nào.
Sayadaw is aware that as far as he's concerned, it will never be possible for a one-wheel cart to move along in this place.
Vậy là khi ta này là nhà mình là phía sinh ra để check cái này của yêu ta rồi này yu te na yu hu te te ne ma pi de ba bu ai da li di nalong da de swet twa aw taniya pin kaung ne ma swet twa aw lo mat ta tha mu le lo ba de ai da ka dharana lo khaw ba de.
However, it is not quite sufficient for the questioner to just listen very carefully to what the Sayadaw has to say. The Sayadaw's answer may be given in the best of spirit, with total sincerity and according to his best ability. But if it is only listened to but not borne in mind, then again the benefits will not be forthcoming to the questioner. So that brings us to the fourth aspect, which is bearing in mind. Not only has one got to listen very carefully to what is being said, but one has also got to bear that in mind.
အဲ့ဒီလိုနာယူမှုသဝနာနဲ့ဓာရဏဆောင်းမမှုဆောင်းမမှုဓာရဏပြုတဲ့အခါမျိုးမှာဤသုံးနည်းရှိပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီဤသုံးနည်းကအဝကုသပညာဆိုတာပါလေအိုးမှောက်ပြီးတော့ထားတဲ့သဘောမျိုးလို့ပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒီလိုယူတဲ့နည်းကတနည်းပြီးတော့ဥစ္စေကပညာပေါင်းခွင်ပေါ်မှာပေါင်းခွင်အတိညာရှိတဲ့နည်းကတနည်းအဲတော့ပုထုပညာဒုတယ်ကျေပြတ်တဲ့အတိစိတ်တက်နဲ့ယူတဲ့နည်းကတနည်းအဲ့ဒီသုံးနည်းရှိပါတယ်
နောက်ဆုံးနည်း
ပုထုပညာ
ဆိုတာပဲ
ဒုတယ်ကြီးမားတဲ့ကျေပြတ်တဲ့အတိညာစိတ်ရှိတယ်စိတ်ထားပြီးတော့လေ့လာတာဒါဒီနာကြားပြီးတော့လေ့လာမယ်အထုတ်မယ်တရားဒီအထုတ်မယ်ဆိုတဲ့အနေနဲ့မြင်မြင်ကြည့်စွာတယ်အတိညာထားပြီးတော့လေ့လာတာ
ပထမကအိုးမောက်
ပညာနောက်ဒီပေါင်ဝင်တင်ထားတဲ့ပညာဥစ္စာပဲ
There are three useful methods for trying to fulfill the requirements for these two aspects that we talked about, the aspect of listening carefully and of bearing in mind. The first method is called is the method of an overturned pot. And the second method is the method of putting on the lap. And the third method is one of Putupanya. Of great or ambitious wisdom.
အဲ့ဒီသုံးမျိုးတွေကအိုးမှောက်နီးနဲ့ယူတဲ့ဆိုတာကတော့ဥရိခွက်တွေဆိုတာတစ်ခုခုထည့်เสียပဲဒါပေမဲ့လို့အဲ့ဒီဥဟာပက်လက်လာမနေပဲနဲ့မှောက်နေမယ်ဆိုရင်ဘာထည့်တယ်မဝင်ဘူးတချို့ယောဂီတွေတချို့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေတရားနာတဲ့အခါတရားတော့လာနာကြပါလေအတန်လေးလောက်သာကြားတာပဲကျန်တဲ့ဟာဒီစူးစိုက်မနာဘူးအဲ့ဒါလို့စိတ်တွေပြန့်လွင်ပြီးတော့တရားကောင်းမနာဘူးဆိုရင်အတန်လောက်သာကြားပြီးတော့တရားရဲ့အဓိပ္ပာယ်နားတဲ့မှာနှလုံးသားထဲမှာမစွဲတော့မစွဲပဲဖြစ်ပြီးတော့အကုန်လုံးရှံထွက်ကုန်တာပါလေထွက်ကုန်တာအဲ့ဒါအဝကုသပညာနည်းနဲ့နားတယ်လို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်
Perhaps I should retranslate the passage just now. It seems that these three methods are not really methods. They are three ways in which one attend to the two aspects of listening carefully and bearing in mind. The first way, which is the way of an overturned bowl or pot. It's quite interesting. It's like, as you all know, a pot or a bowl is a receptacle. If it's placed properly, standing on its base, then one can fill it with whatever that we want to fill. It can be a very suitable container. However, if it is placed upside down, overturned, then no matter what you pour into it, will only slip by and spill over. This way of listening can be seen in the yogi who comes to the hall for a Dhamma talk and sits down and closes the eyes and listens. But he doesn't quite pay attention to what is happening. He hears a lot of sound, but he's not quite interested in the meaning of what is being said, the sense of what is being said. So it's just sound to him and quite meaningless. So that is the first way, the way of an overturned bowl.
ဒုတိယကတော့ဥစဉ်ကပညာနီးနဲ့နားထောင်တာပေါ့ဒုတိယဟာဒီနေရာမှာလာပြီးတော့ထိုင်လိုက်တယ်သူ့ပါလာတဲ့ပစ္စည်းပေါ့လေပုံပေါ်မှာသို့မဟုတ်ရင်ဝင်ပေါ်မှာခဏထားတယ်အများနဲ့စကားတွေဘာတွေပြောဆိုပြီးတော့မိမိလျော့ရော့နေပေါ့လေထားလိုက်တဲ့အခါမှာပေါင်ဝဲပစ္စည်းအောက်ကျန်နေကြရောကြာနေကြရောပါမသွားဘူးဒါလိုပဲတချို့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်များတရားနာတဲ့အခါစိတ်တော့မပြန့်လွင်မဲနဲ့တော့နာတော့နာပါတယ်နာတယ်လည်းပဲရောက်ပါတယ်လှုံသားတယ်လည်းရောက်ပါတယ်နာတော့သဘောပေါက်တယ်လို့ပါပဲဒါမှမဟုတ်တရားဝဲလည်းပြီးရောထသွားတဲ့အခါဘာမှပါမသွားတော့ဘူးဒီမှာတရားနာရဌာနမှာပဲအကုန်လုံးနာကြချက်တည်းကျမ်းနေခဲ့တယ်အဲ့ဒါလိုနီးနဲ့နာတာကတော့ဥစဉ်ကပညာလို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်
The second way is that of placing on the lap. Now that refers to there is a person who goes to visit some friends, goes in and sits down on the floor, cross-legged, and place some things on his or her lap. Things, perhaps some drinks or some gifts, some whatever it may be, placed on the lap and gets engaged in a very interesting conversation with his guests, his hosts. At the end of the conversation, at the end of the visit, very absent-mindedly, he suddenly stands up, and all the things that are placed on the lap falls off onto the ground. So this refers to the yogi who comes to the Dhamma talk and listens quite attentively and understands and appreciates the sense of what is being said in the talk. But it is not kept in the heart, it is not borne in mind. As soon as the talk ends, and he gets up and everything falls off his lap onto the ground again. So that is the second way.
Now, so to get you the Theravada sing with was even a suicide Naja and Naja let me Tia on Chinto so that you check Congo Nara. The Shalima the Theravada sing with was even at Nara only. I don't Japan at Dinya. Do the Chima at Dinya Naja and Nilu cover. Era putu penya lo khawa da
putu sa tu de
chi ma la che pian na ba ni ကျေပြတ်တဲ့ဒီစိတ်ညုံဒီစိတ်
But for a yogi who comes to the hall for a Dhamma talk, coming in with a very respecting mind, with the intention of really wanting to listen very carefully to what is being said, and to bear in mind the very important points of practice, that yogi can be said to be one who attends to this aspect of listening with according to the way of outstanding foresight. It is for one who has the foresight, and that is quite outstanding in the sense that that foresight is not easy to come by. That stands out in the crowd.
ဘုရားတို့ပိဋကကတော့အဲ့ဒီနောက်ဆုံးပုထုပညာပိဋကမျိုးပါပဲအဲ့ဒီတိုင်းလည်းပဲဘုရားတို့ယူဆထားပါတယ်
Sayadaw believes that the yogis present in this hall belong to this third category.
အခုအထိဥက္ကဟာပရိပု္ပ္ပာသဝနာဓာရဏပြီးတော့ပါပြီသမစနာဆိုတာကတော့ကသမပฏิပတ်တိနဲ့အတူတူပါပဲရှေ့ပိုင်းအချက်၄ချက်ကျေပြွန်သွားလို့ရှိရင်နားလည်သွားလို့ရှိရင်သမစနာဆိုတာသုံးသတော်တာပဲနိလမှန်စွာကျင့်သုံးတဲ့အပိုင်းရောက်သွားတော့တာပါပဲဒီမှာ
We have finished the first four factors of study, of questioning, of listening carefully, and bearing in mind. The fifth factor, or the fifth aspect, concerns putting into practice what has been studied and what has been clarified and what has been borne in mind.
အဲ့ဒီလိုလေ့လာမေးမြန်းနာယူမှတ်သားမှုဟာဘာနဲ့ပတ်သက်သလဲဘာမှီးနေသလဲလို့ဆိုတော့တန်တတ္ထရိဓမ္မေစပတ္တရာယတ္တံလို့ဒီလိုဆက်ပြထားပါတယ်တန်ထိုတို့နိလမစွာကျင့်သုံးရေးအတွက်နိနာကောင်းကိုလေ့လာမေးမြန်းနာယူမှတ်သားခြင်းသည်တတ္ထရိနိပြည့်တော်မူတဲ့ဘုရားအပေါ်၌၎င်းဓမ္မေစနိလန်းဖြစ်တဲ့အခုလိုထေတ္တန်းစားသတိပဋ္ဌာန်လုပ်ငန်းစဉ်တရား၌၎င်းပတ္တရာယတ္တကြည်ညိုလေးစားမြတ်နိုးမှုနဲ့ဆက်ဆက်နေပါသည်တဲ့တရားနာကြတယ်ဆိုတာနိပြည့်တဲ့ဘုရားဘုံမှာလည်းပဲလေးစားမှုမရှိဘူးတရားရဲ့အကျိုးမတိပဲနဲ့ဗောလိတရားပေါ်မှာဒီလောက်အကျိုးရှိတဲ့တရားပေါ်မှာလည်းပဲလေးစားမှုမရှိဘူးဆိုရင်နာလို့မဖြစ်ပါဘူးလေးလာလို့လည်းမဖြစ်ဘူးမင်းများလို့လည်းမဖြစ်ဘူးနာလို့လည်းမဖြစ်ဘူးဆောင်းလို့လည်းမဖြစ်ဘူးလေးလာလို့လည်းမဖြစ်နိုင်ပါဘူးဒီတော့ဒီလိုခုနလေးလာမင်းများနာယူမှတ်သားမှုဆိုတာလောဘဒေါသအစရှိတဲ့ကိလေသာတွေကိုကင်းငြိမ်းဖို့နိမှန်တွေကိုပေးတော်မူတဲ့မြတ်စွာဘုရားအဲဒီမြတ်စွာဘုရားပေါ်မှာလည်းပဲလေးစားမှုရှိရပါတယ်ကိလေသာငြိမ်းချမ်းဖြစ်တဲ့တရားနိလန်းနေပေါ်မှာလည်းပဲယူသေးသေးလေးလေးစားစားရှိဖို့အရေးကြီးပါတယ်ဝိရှုမှတ်တဲ့အခါမှာအထိုင်သာကိုယ်ဆန့်လှုပ်ရှားစသည်ပေါ့လေဒါတွေအဲဒီပြုရတာလက်တွေ့လုပ်တဲ့အခါမျိုးမှာလည်းယူသေးသေးလေးလေးစားစားရှိအရေးကြီးပါတယ်ဒီမှာယုံကြည်မှုမရှိဘူးဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တော့ဘာမှလုပ်လို့မဖြစ်ပါဘူးဒါကြောင့်ဒီမှာယုံကြည်လေးစားမြတ်နိုးမှုရှိရမယ်လို့ကျမ်းဂန်များမှာပြထားပါတယ်
One may perhaps ask how these five aspects are related to one may ask what these 5 aspects are related to. These 5 aspects come about on account of faith, respect, and a sense of cherishing, having the faith in the Buddha, the person who taught the way to end suffering, the way of liberation of greed, hatred and delusion, as well as faith in, respect for and the cherishing of the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha that leads us to practice and achieve liberation from the kilesas. If one does not have this basic faith, respect and a sense of cherishing the Buddha and the Dhamma, then it will not be possible for any of the 5 aspects of study, questioning, listening, bearing in mind and practice to actually take place.
ဘုန်းကြီးအနေနဲ့ပြောချင်တာတော့ဘုရားဘောမှာကြီးညိုလေးစားမှုဆိုတာကတော့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ရေးရာဆန်းနေတော့ခဏထားရင်လည်းထားလိုက်ပါတကယ်စိတ်ဓာတ်စင်ကြယ်ရေးအတွက်ဒီကြောင့်ဒီသောခီးဖြစ်တဲ့သတိပဋ္ဌာန်လုပ်ငန်းစဉ်တရားပေါ်မှာလေးစားမြတ်နိုးပေါ်ရရင်တော်တော့ပါပြီအဲ့ဒါလို့ဆိုကျေနပ်ပါပြီ
For fear of being labeled or being accused of trying to propagate a sort of a personality cult, we could perhaps for the moment put aside that first requirement, but it should be remembered that faith in the Dhamma, respect for the Dhamma, and the cherishing of the Dhamma are essential qualities of mind, are essential prerequisites which which are needed for a successful and effective practicing of this spiritual path. The Dhamma of here, of course, refers to the Satipatthana Vipassana meditation as a path that will lead to purification, to freedom from the kilesas.
တရားပေါ်မှာလေးစားမြတ်နိုးမှုရှိရင်နာယူမေးမြန်းလေ့လာနာယူလေ့လာမေးမြန်းနာယူမှတ်သားမှုဖြစ်သွားပါပြီအဲ့ဒါလို့ဖြစ်ရင်လည်းပဲနီလမှန်စွာကျင့်သုံးမှုအပိုင်းရောက်သွားပါပြီနီလမှန်စွာကျင့်သုံးမှုအပိုင်းရောက်သွားလို့ရှိရင်မကျင့်သုံးလို့ဖြစ်ခွင့်ရှိတဲ့ဇာကရောဒအစရှိတဲ့အနှောက်အယှက်အညစ်အကြေးတွေလည်းပဲကင်းပါပြီအဲ့ဒါတွေကင်းရင်အဆင့်ဆင့်ကင်းလို့ရှိရင်ယုံနာပိုင်းခြားသိမှုကအစပေါ့လေဉာဏ်လေးတွေလည်းပွင့်လာမှာနောက်ဆုံးဝဋ္တသစ္စာခေါ်တဲ့နိဗ္ဗာန်ကိုပေါ့လေအရိယာမဉ္ဇဉ်ဘုံဉာဏ်နဲ့မျက်မှောက်ပြုတဲ့အထိဖြစ်သွားမှာပါပဲ
With faith in the Dhamma, respect for the Dhamma, and a real sense of cherishing the Dhamma, then one is on one's way. One is able to cultivate these 4 aspects of study, questioning, listening, bearing in mind, and practice. And when this is set rolling, then one can say that one has started on the path of right practice. And once this right practice is being done, then it will help to dispel the kilesas that could arise out of the ignorance of non-practice. Because one does not practice, one can be assailed by a lot of kilesas based on that basic ignorance. And with the actual practice of the Eightfold Noble Path, of this Satipatthana meditation, then one goes a further step by dispelling the delusive sort of ignorance based on misconception, because through the knowledge that arises in the course of practice, then one is quite free from the kilesas. There is, for example, the insight into mind and matter, insight into their relationship of cause and effect, and to their characteristics of impermanence, of suffering, and of non-self.
အဲ့ဒီတိုင်းနိလပါစွာကျင့်သုံးနိုင်ရလို့စိတ်စင်ကြယ်မှုကအစယုံနာလေးတွေပိုင်းခြားသိပြီးတော့တစ်ဆင့်နဲ့တစ်ဆင့်ဉာဏ်တွေပွင့်ပြီးတော့နောက်ဆုံးဝိဝတ္တသစ္စာနှစ်ခုကိုပိုင်ပိုင်နိုင်နိုင်နဲ့သိနိုင်လောက်တဲ့အထိကြိုးစားဖွားများအထောက်နိုင်ကြပါစေ
So I would like to conclude again today's talk by wishing that all of you may be able to cultivate these 5 aspects that was discussed and walk on this Satipatthana path, go through the various levels of insight and attain the attained realization of the second pair of the Four Noble Truths, which leads to escape from samsara.